If you're needing a great coffee to go into the backcountry or places you can't take a typical coffee maker, consider CS Instant Coffee. Use the code ADVENTURE at checkout at csinstant.coffee for 20% off. And Athletic Brewing, the makers of the only non-alcoholic craft beer geared towards helping adventure athletes stay in shape, giving athletes the ability to train hard and still feel good about enjoying a tasting craft beer after a long training session. Use the code ADVENTURE at checkout for 15% off.
You know, I get emails all the time. I don't have climbing experience, but I want to climb Everest. Although it might sound absurd, it sends people down this road of like, okay, what do I need to do to prepare for Everest? And I work with people on a progression. And then all of a sudden you start building this experience and maybe you're ready for Everest down the track.
This is the Adventure Sports Podcast, trying to help you find adventure every day. In any stage of life, you're going to hear from explorers, adventurers, business owners, and anyone living their life a little more out of the box than usual. Hey folks, I hope you had a really good weekend. Today we are starting off strong this week with an awesome episode with Mike Hamill. God, he has done so much. He has been a climbing guide for over 20 years. He's led over 120 major high-altitude climbing expeditions. He's summited Everest 6 times. He's done all the 7 summits, the highest mountains on every continent, at least 6 times. And some of them he's done almost 30 times. He once did the 7 summits in 220 days, way less than a calendar year. And he's done 13 8,000 meter summits on 3 different mountains. And he's led over 23 8,000 meter expeditions. He's done 50 ascents of Mount Rainier. He's skied to the South Pole. He's bicycled across America because, why not? And he's tied for the record of the most Adirondack high peaks climbed in one day, which is 15. He's an ultra runner, marathoner, Ironman skier, climber, of course, traveler, and fly fisherman. And today he's just talking with us about, what is it like to take people on Everest, take people on Vincent Massif, take people on Kilimanjaro, just to guide into what's behind all this, because guys, he's the real deal. And if you at all are interested in learning more about the 7 summits or high altitude mountaineering, please reach out to Mike. He shares his email late in the episode, so I encourage you to listen all the way to the end. And he's just well-spoken, great storyteller, and is one of the world's leaders in guiding on these really big mountains. And also, I wanted to say thank you for listening in today. All right, let's do this. So I saw your numbers, Australia, which is, where you're coming from today, but you have absolutely no accent, Australian accent, that is. Where's home for you? Where do you call home?
I'm living in Australia now. I just married a beautiful Australian lady a couple years ago, and so decided to move down here. But before that, I called Seattle home for about 15 years, and originally from New Hampshire, so up in the Northeast United States up there.
Not a flat area, but not the biggest mountains even in the country, much less in the world. Can you just kind of explain, what does a kid in New Hampshire go from, the whites to the Himalayas? How does that work?
Yeah, it was interesting. When I was growing up, there was a bit of media around these hardcore New Hampshire climbers, and as you say, it's an older mountain range, so it's the peaks are smaller up there, but there's a lot of really good ice and rock climbing, albeit shorter routes. And so there was a hardcore crew of climbers that had gone and climbed Everest, and I grew up in the same town as Dartmouth College, and their outing club, they were doing trips all around the world to South America and Nepal, and they'd come into our high school and give slideshows and stuff like that. And so that was kind of my intro. And I just found it so fascinating it really sparked my interest. And I grew up, Nordic skiing, so being outside, but also just doing a lot of winter hiking in the hills up there in New Hampshire. And kind of the natural progression was to get into climbing from there. And I was so inspired by these local guys going out and conquering the most exotic peaks in the world that that's kind of what triggered that interest there.
And so what did it lead to? Did it lead to just bigger mountains here in the States before going elsewhere in the world? And at kind of what age was that happening for you?
Yeah, I went to school in New York State, kind of near the Adirondacks, went to university over there. And that's where I really started getting into ice climbing and rock climbing. And I did a semester abroad up in Alaska and was able to get on some bigger peaks up there. And I just love climbing. So after university, I got a summer job working as an intern on Mount Rainier in Washington, and absolutely fell in love with it. And one thing led to another there. I did a trip around the world, climbed Aconcagua. While I was traveling, I started to get other opportunities to guide elsewhere around the world on Aconcagua and over in Nepal. And it was just kind of a natural progression from, the smaller peaks in the Northeast on up to the tallest peaks in the world. And I was just given a lot of opportunities that I tried to seize, and that was pretty much it.
Wow. So kind of what age is this? Is this right at college and right after? So you're still pretty young and experiencing all this for, the first time. Was there a huge jump at all in skill set, or was it kind of like just bigger versions of what you already knew how to do?
There was a long progression. I think my mentors in the outing club at the St. Lawrence University outing club, they really taught me the basics, the fundamentals. And that semester abroad, or the semester I did up in Alaska, I took some climbing courses with a few of the professors there, and they taught me a lot of what I needed to know. So, I tried to get the best training that I could, but a lot of climbing is just building up that experience and kind of trial and error, and getting back in the wilderness and kind of learning those systems on your own. So the more experience I got, the more comfortable I felt. But now it's just kind of a smooth, natural progression. I wouldn't say there were any huge leaps in there. Obviously, getting that summer job on Rainier, we had so many world-class guides that I was working with and being mentored by, just watching how they performed in the mountains and what they did and their skill set, that helped me hugely.
And so which was it, Aconcagua or Denali, that was your first of the 7 summits?
It's interesting. When I was in high school, I actually came down, I was a Nordic skier, as I mentioned, competitive Nordic skier, and I came down to Australia to train in our summer, their winter down here. And we actually, one day we were skiing near Mount Kosciuszko, and we just happened to ski to the top of Kosciuszko. So, I didn't even know it at the time, but Kosciuszko is one of the 7 summits, and that was my first one.
Yeah, wow. Didn't even know it.
It's not the most challenging one, but it kind of set me on my course. But no, when I was in college, myself and a few other guys from my university, we went up to Alaska and climbed Denali, and that was really my first experience on the 7 summits. And to be totally honest, we were solid climbers on ice and rock, but we hadn't spent a lot of time on those big glaciated peaks. So we were a bit out of our element. That was a big leap for us. I don't think we realized how big of a leap that was. And so that was a huge learning opportunity for me. And we actually didn't summit on that expedition. surprisingly enough, I got really altitude ill moving up to high camp there, and didn't feel comfortable continuing. So we came back down off that trip. But as I say, I learned a lot on that expedition and went back up a few years later and summited. So that was my first real expedition to the Seven Summits.
Now, did something feel different about knowing you were at the highest point of a continent versus maybe just climbing any other mountain, peak, summit somewhere? Was there something special about being on one of those?
I think there was. For me, going to school in Alaska for that semester, for me, there was only one mountain in the world. There was only one great mountain, and that was Denali. I'd flown by it, and it just looked so impressive to me. And that's what all the locals talk about up there, the mighty Denali. So that was the only peak on my horizon. I couldn't even conceptualize what Everest or some of these other 8,000 meter peaks were. So Denali was the only thing that really caught my fascination, and that was the one that I wanted to climb.
So once you did, you're obviously your sights began to search elsewhere around the world, because you definitely didn't stop there. What did it look like for you after that? What started becoming kind of your goal for the next summit, or did you have the Seven Summits in mind at that point?
Not at all. And I think just guiding for these companies that I was working for at the time, there was a lot of work guiding the Seven Summits. So I kind of naturally, that's where I ended up getting work. So I didn't, I basically at that point, getting out of university, I just wanted to see the world and climb as much as I could. And a great way to see the world was to travel and climb some of these seven summits. So I naturally just started ticking them off on my own and traveling for work with the opportunities that I got working for these various companies. And, I don't think I necessarily had a goal in mind. I just really wanted to climb as much as I could and see the world. And that's what really got me out there chasing these peaks.
And that probably does account for some of the, how often you've climbed some of these mountains. It's a lot more affordable when someone's paying you to take them rather than just, going 6 times on your own, paying for it all yourself. I can imagine.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of people wonder how to fund climbing the seven summits because they are expensive. And really that was my way to fund it, was to work hard and try and get jobs on these peaks and just see the world. But it definitely wasn't a goal of mine necessarily to climb the seven summits. It was just one thing led to another, and I was guiding a lot of the seven summits every year. So I figured I'd go and finish them all. And, there were a few I did on my own that were really challenging logistically at the time. There wasn't a lot of information out there on some of these peaks like, Vincent or Elbrus. And so that was kind of the catalyst for writing the book, Climbing the Seven Summits. I wanted to compile all the information that I had found in one spot. And, luckily the Mountaineers books out of Seattle, they thought it was a good idea as well, and were super supportive. So we worked together on that book, and that was really the catalyst there for writing that book.
We actually work pretty closely with them. They send it, pretty much any author coming out, though, we'll have them interviewed on this show first. And we know them very well, and they're great people.
Oh, it's great to hear. Yeah, they do an amazing job over there.
So writing that, that guidebook, what did people think? Like, was it well received? Because I can imagine, you're kind of putting yourself out there when you're saying, is it kind of like, this is how I did it? You don't necessarily have to do it this way, but this is all the information I wish I had when I would have started.
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to put the information out there, and it's really, just an informational book. It doesn't have my opinion on how to climb the different peaks in there. So the response was overwhelmingly positive. I've heard, very little negative since the book has come out, and I think people are just really psyched to have that resource, and all the color photos in the book and stuff. People were just really psyched to kind of be able to see and experience some of these peaks before they go there. Even if they're an armchair mountaineer, they can still kind of experience these exotic places around the world, even if they may never go climb there. So it's been a very positive experience all around writing the book. It was a lot of work. It was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, but it was a great challenge, and I'm glad I did it.
Man, that is too funny. It was harder than you thought it was going to be. You're someone that's done some of the hardest things humans ever are going to do. And that's funny because a lot of people we talk to are also, they're writing a book, so they're promoting it and they're doing interviews. And they say the book writing part was harder than usually the expedition that they did. We hear it all the time, which is hilarious.
Yeah, it's funny because us mountain people were, for us, climbing Mount Everest is kind of a natural thing, and we enjoy that. It's our passion, so it comes a lot easier to us than sitting in front of a desk 10 hours a day. So writing the book Climbing the Seven Summits was definitely a bigger challenge for me than climbing Mount Everest. And now we've started our own company, Climbing the Seven Summits, and I have to say that was a bigger challenge than climbing any of these peaks as well. There's so many, there's so much administration and organization that comes with starting a company. But, I've always been someone that's liked to challenge myself in different ways. And certainly starting a business was a big challenge. And I'm glad I took that challenge, and it's been rewarding for us. The company's growing quickly, but it's definitely, it doesn't come as natural to me as climbing the mountains. That's for sure.
Did you find that surprising, starting your business?
A little bit. I had seen a lot of the back end of the business side of climbing with the other companies I had worked with. So it wasn't a total surprise, but it was definitely, it was a lot harder work than I thought it was going to be, just like writing the book.
But something you want to continue doing. It's not hard enough or not as exciting enough to say, I don't want to do this anymore.
No, absolutely. Yeah. It's been one of the best things I've done starting the business, just to be more in control of how I run my trips and my programs, and having that kind of deeper interaction with my clientele has been super rewarding. So it's been a great step for me, and it's something we're going to continue with for as long as we can, as long as my knees hold out.
Is your body holding up?
It is. Yeah. My body's been doing well. I've certainly put a lot of miles on it. About this time last year, I had a mountain biking accident in Colorado and actually broke my femur, and I've got a lot of hardware in my leg now because of that. So that's kind of slowed me down the last year, but I'm getting back to 100% now and back in the mountains fairly full time. So it hasn't really been the mountains that's taken a toll on me. It was more just that mountain biking crash. But yeah, the body's holding up pretty well.
Oh, that's good, man. That's awesome to hear. I know with any line of work where your body's health is so important, something like that can be a lot more scary than just a simple. So it's a lot more than just a little bike accident. It's a threat to your livelihood even.
Absolutely.
So you've been guiding for over 2 decades now. Incredibly experienced. Yep. Gosh, you have just so many summits, and summiting all 7 of the 7 summits over 6 times each at least. Well, yep. I want to know from you, you're probably the best person in the world to ask this. What is the biggest misconception or the biggest thing people don't think about when they think or glamorize what you do for a living?
Well, I'd say a lot of people do think it's a pretty glamorous lifestyle, but you're on the road all the time. For over a decade, I was on the road 250, 300 days a year. And it's great. You're seeing the world. You're meeting so many amazing people and having these incredible experiences. But, I find there needs to be a balance. And luckily now, running my own company, I have a bit more of a balance. But people definitely think it's glamorous to be in the mountains all the time. But it's kind of one of those scenarios where the grass is always greener, and sometimes it's nice to just be in one place and be part of a community and put some roots down and not be living out of a duffel bag. And it is pretty hard, being on the road all the time and just living out of a duffel bag and being transient. So it's nice to have a bit more balance nowadays with the company.
I can only imagine, man. We're only seeing the highlights for you. And I've done some very basic guided trips. I would love to know, for you, what is one of the most tedious, maybe the most, your time-consuming thing that people don't realize for a guided trip when you're taking clients to maybe summit a big mountain? What's something that's takes up a lot of your time, though? It's kind of surprising.
Really putting the logistics in place. It's all the back end work that people, I don't think, necessarily realize. With, say, our Everest expedition, I'm working with Tendi and his other co-owners in Nepal year round to plan these Everest expeditions. Literally, we finish one Everest expedition and we start planning for the next year. So it's really a full-time job for a team of people for an entire year. And it just kind of culminates with the actual Everest expedition. But the amount of hours we put in, organizing the trek or Sherpas and buying oxygen bottles and, communicating with clients and all of that is, it's a huge amount of work just getting everything ready for the climb. And I think people don't necessarily understand that or see that. And it's kind of ideal if they don't understand it, because that means the trip is going smoothly.
So we want to thank our sponsor, Athletic Brewing, for promoting a healthy lifestyle through making some of the world's best non-alcoholic craft beer. They make excellent tasting NA for healthy, active, modern adults. They use certified all-organic grains, and each can of non-alcoholic beer is only between 50 and 70 calories. They have IPA, golden ale, stouts, and tons of seasonal offerings. And recently, they actually just took home the gold medal at the U.S. Open Beer Championships for their double hop IPA. If you would like to get your hands on some, you can save 15% by using the code ADVENTURE at athleticbrewing.com. Athletic Brewing, the best tasting way to keep your promises. And I also want to thank our sponsor, CS Instant Coffee, for making this show happen. They make 100% Arabica instant coffee. They use compostable packaging, and each package makes about 20 ounces of coffee. So I'll take one of those with me on an overnight trip, and it makes 2 pretty good-sized cups of coffee. And it's an awesome feeling knowing I can just throw that in my backpack, find some hot water, and I'm good to go. Save 20% by using the code ADVENTURE at csinstant.coffee. Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. And I imagine a lot of these expeditions kind of have to happen at the same time, with weather windows and all that. And so are you managing like teams of people all over the world at different climbs?
We are. Yeah, at the moment. We just had a Rainier climb get back from, they were climbing for the Tiger at the Snows Fund, which is a nonprofit, educational nonprofit that I run. And we've got teams on Kilimanjaro right now. And we're gearing up for Choyu and Ecuador coming up soon. So at any one time, we could have 2 or 3 trips going, and I may be out on a trip as well, calling back into the office to find out what's going on, and maybe giving a client a call from Antarctica on the sat phone to check in with them to answer any questions they have. So it's there are a lot of moving parts, but that's part of the challenge of it. That's part of the excitement of it that I love.
Man, that sounds like absolutely soul crushing stress to me. I mean,
it can be stressful for sure.
Gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just that you're dealing with these trips. You're dealing with these people who it might be their, only shot at one of these mountains. They've trained for a year.
Yeah.
You got all your teams everywhere, all these clients. And not only that, they're not just sitting in a coffee shop somewhere. They're in some of the most dangerous environments on earth. So you've got so many things to think about. Holy cow. That's pretty impressive. Yeah. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, it's there's definitely some stress that goes along with it. I think, the most stressed out I am is during Everest season, and that's just because, so many people have entrusted me with their dream of climbing Mount Everest, and they've put a lot of money on the line. They've invested a lot of time and effort in training, and I just want to. My whole goal is to help them achieve their goal and, make sure their trip runs smoothly and they have the best opportunity at standing on top. And so I put a lot of pressure on myself to make that happen as best as possible. And, we've had a great record. I think we do a great job, especially on Mount Everest, but it's a lot of stress and a lot of pressure for sure.
How hard is it to give bad news when you have to?
It's really hard. There was a scenario this last year on Everest. We had our team go up for the second rotation. They were sitting at Camp 2. And then all of a sudden, there was a cyclone brewing in the Bay of Bengal, and it looked like it was going to affect the mountain. And this was a serious storm, one of the biggest cyclones in years, building in the Bay. And so we made the tough call to bring our team down, knowing that would mean they'd have to go up for another rotation, and it would put them about a week behind in the schedule. But we made that tough call, brought our team down because we wanted to know they were safe. Sure enough, the cyclone hammered the mountain, dumped a couple feet of snow. Everyone that was still on the mountain was just absolutely blasted by high winds. I think they lost 150 tents up there. Everyone was safe, but it was not a place I wanted my team. And at the time, everyone was really frustrated with me that I had brought them off the mountain. They wanted to stay up and finish their rotation. But afterwards, when they saw how much carnage was on the mountain, they were very thankful, and everyone went up on the summer rotation and summited, and everything was a huge success. So people were very thankful afterwards, but, it was a really tough call for me to make, but, in some senses, it's an easy call. If you know it's the right call to make, if you're keeping your team safe, then, it's easy to pull them off the mountain, make sure they're safe and do the right thing. So yeah, sometimes it's tough, sometimes it's stressful, but if you're true to who you are and try and keep your team safe, then it usually works out in the end.
It seemed like it really worked out that time because they were still able to go up and try again, and it was successful. Have you ever had to make an unpopular decision and then it end up, maybe looking back, wasn't the best decision?
I'm trying to think. I'm sure there have been scenarios like that on my trips over the years. You get into those situations where you're forced to make a tough call, and sometimes that call is right, sometimes it's wrong. And based on the information you have and your experience, you have to make that call. And I've definitely made some calls that turned out to be wrong in the past, but luckily, I've had enough experience in the mountains now, and also, working with people like Tandy in the Himalayas that have a ton of experience as well. And some of our lead guides, Casey Crom, Tommy Cheppy, Oswaldo Friere, we put our heads together and we kind of make a collective decision based on all our experience. And so in general, we've made the right call, but sometimes, I've made some wrong calls in the mountains, and I've definitely heard about it from the clients.
I can only imagine, man. You get some guy spend a bunch of money telling everyone in his entire world he's climbing Everest, and then has to come back home and say he didn't make it. And it's probably easy for someone like that to find a scapegoat in someone making a decision like you. So whatever. It is what it is. I'm sure. As long as he comes home and he gets home, he gets to come home and tell his family rather than someone else having to say that something bad happened.
Exactly. I never fault my guides or myself for playing it a bit conservative. At the end of the day, you need your clients to be safe and come home and, be with their families. And, so I try and be a bit conservative, but also do whatever we can to get people to the top safely if we can. So over the years, it's worked out pretty well.
I'm sure you get quite a few stubborn clients that don't want to listen to you at some point.
Overwhelmingly, it's been good. I think we attract some really good clients. So it's rare that I've had issues like that. I think I have enough experience in the mountains now that in general, people kind of respect my decision making, but yeah, sometimes you get some stubborn clients, and we get a lot of really successful type A personalities, people that run multinational corporations and have thousands of employees, and they're used to being in charge. And, sometimes it's tough for them to kind of bite their tongue a bit and let me make the decisions, but that's what they're hiring me to do. They're hiring my experience and expertise in the mountains, and overwhelmingly, people respect that, and it's been pretty good.
Oh man, that's so cool! Just to be able to be a leading force, like a leading voice in that is what I meant. And you've climbed every summit at least 6 times, but those are just the highlights. How many attempts has that been? Because I'm sure you weren't successful every time.
Yeah, no, I haven't been successful every time. Some of these peaks, Aconcagua I've climbed 29 times, and Denali 16 times, Elbrus 20 plus times. So, we've had a lot of expeditions to these mountains, and we're not always successful. I've been turned around multiple times on several of these peaks, Denali and Aconcagua, and Everest. Of course, you probably remember the year that the Serac came down and killed some Sherpa on Everest in 2014. The expedition was canceled that year. Everyone decided that was it. We needed to kind of honor those lost souls and call the expedition off. And that was a very tough year, just kind of picking up the pieces and, helping those families deal with that loss. And then the next year as well, 2015, we had an earthquake that kicked off a big avalanche that rolled through base camp, and we had quite a few deaths at base camp that year. And so we called off that expedition as well. So there have been quite a few false starts, and turned around on plenty of peaks, and they're all learning experiences. I think if you were guaranteed a summit, then it wouldn't be the challenge it is. And the fact that it's such a hard sport and you get turned around so many times, that's really the great challenge of it. If the summit of Everest was guaranteed, then Everest wouldn't be what it is.
Absolutely. Now, I know, like you just mentioned a little bit, Everest is kind of, because a lot of those accidents, it's kind of been in a critical light in the last few years, especially this past season with a couple pictures that came out of that, that line of people to the summit. Have you seen a big change in the seven summits? I know Everest is, kind of the pinnacle of popularity, but have you seen a change in the seven summits in general over the last 20 years that you've been doing this?
Yeah, the seven summits are becoming more popular, and we're definitely seeing that on Everest. Numbers are rising on Everest. So these peaks are changing, where there's a lot more infrastructure on these mountains than there was certainly 20 years ago. So they're a lot more accessible, and that's good and it's bad. It helps people achieve their goals, but it also attracts more people that don't necessarily have the experience to be on these mountains. And, with everything, Everest being what it is, the tallest mountain on Earth, everything is magnified on Everest. So, I think one of the biggest issues we're dealing with on Everest right now is it's kind of twofold. Clients not necessarily educating themselves well enough as to which guide service or logistics provider they should go with, and maybe attempting Everest prematurely without the experience that they need. And then on the other side, we have these logistics providers. We have these kind of cheaper companies that are sort of portraying themselves as guide services when really they're just logistics providers. So you get these inexperienced people showing up on Everest because they see a cheap price tag, and they're the ones that need the most guidance. And then they show up on this trip that offers no guidance. And that's why so many people are getting into trouble. And that's why we had so many deaths on Everest this past season. And, people talk about the crowds a lot, and the crowds are certainly an issue. There are things we're doing to mitigate the crowds on Everest, or certainly their influence on how Summit Day plays out. But really, the reason so many people died on Everest this last year was because you've got too many inexperienced people going with these cheap, low-cost logistics providers that are just offering no guidance whatsoever, and they're not taking any responsibility when things go wrong on the mountain. If their climbers get into trouble, need a rescue, they're not performing those rescues, and they're just cashing checks, and it's a huge problem. And I think it's something we really need to address, and that needs to be in the media more, so that people can do their homework, educate themselves, and find the right program for them on Everest.
So you mean to tell me there's people basically self-guiding up to summit Everest with just like an itinerary in hand and some logistics figured out, that they don't actually have anyone taking them up there?
Absolutely. Yeah. Over the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of local Nepali companies, and there are some very reputable local Nepali companies, but there are a lot of new Nepali companies that they found that they can just start a company, offer an Everest expedition, and charge a cut rate price, make good money on that, and not necessarily offer any guidance. So yeah, we've got people over there that shouldn't be on the mountain that are climbing Mount Everest without any guidance, and they're getting into trouble every year, and it's very scary. It's something that needs to be addressed. And in say the United States, it would probably be either the Park Service or the government that would address that and hold these companies accountable. But I think, Nepal being Nepal and being a fairly corrupt place, those checks and balances are not put in place. And that's why so many people are getting into trouble up there.
I just don't know who's the type of person that says, I'm going to self-guide up Everest. Obviously they're probably with some experience,
yeah,
but like,
yep.
I just can't ever imagine me saying, "Oh, I got the plan. I've got some equipment. I'm going to go for it."
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that people would make that leap. But I think we're seeing a lot more Indian and Chinese climbers these days, and maybe they don't have some of the people attempting Everest from those countries don't have that long background of climbing, and they see this kind of cheaper price tag, and it's very enticing to jump on a cheaper trip. I mean, why pay 60 or 100 grand when you can pay 35 grand? But maybe they're not educating themselves as much as they need to find out what the quality of the trip is. And I don't know if it's kind of a cultural thing, but yeah, it's pretty dangerous. It's pretty scary to see those people up there who very obviously don't have the skill set to be up there. Their crampons are coming off. They've got all brand new gear because they haven't done any climbing before, and they're going for the summit of Everest. And that they don't have the guidance that they need to make the right calls up there. And, I use the example of my teams, my company this last season. We knew that it was going to be busy up there. We knew it was going to be crowded on summit day. So we sent our team up early. They summited before everyone else. And then we're back down through the self summit before the crowds came up, and those photos that you saw appeared online. So if you're experienced and you have the right guidance, those crowds are not necessarily that big of a deal. It's for the people that don't have that experience, or the Sherpa that is not necessarily a climbing Sherpa, but he gets kind of pulled out of his village to go guide Everest when he doesn't necessarily have the experience to do that, and gets sent up on the mountain with a client who's unprepared. And that's where people get into trouble. So I think all of these issues on Everest can be managed if you have the right experience. But if you don't, they're incredibly dangerous.
So, yeah, and I like what you mentioned before, saying, it'd probably be the Park Service, because if Everest was in the United States, it'd be a national park. And because of the popularity, because of actually Mount Rainier is a national park. Mount Whitney is not in a national park, but there's a permit system, and it's pretty strict. I remember... I hate to admit this, but I tried to climb Half Dome, when I was in college without a permit overnight during a full moon. Yep. And by God, at the bottom of the cables, there was a ranger sleeping in a sleeping bag at the bottom of the cables. And
wow.
And yeah. I said, well, I'm not going to try to walk over this guy. He woke up, and he ended up being really nice. And we sat and talked for a while. And he said, hey, I tell you what, if a group comes up and there's an extra spot, I'll let you go with them. No one ever came for like a couple hours, and it was really cold early June or early May. And I just, it just blew my mind, the level of persistence that they were to enforce that rule of the permits. We're used to that here in the States. We're used to a government being very present in our wild places, and it's a great thing. They're the only ones powerful enough to do that. How much of a Wild West is it at some of these camps on your way up to Everest?
It's a bit wild that, as you were mentioning there, there just aren't that many. There isn't a Park Service who's checking up on these things. Really anyone can guide Everest, and that's why we're seeing so many of these local, cheaper Nepali companies pop up, because there's no, like say in Denali or Rainier, you need to apply for a concession and win the concession and be vetted by the Park Service, or, some of these other peaks, you need to be vetted by other companies or the Antarctic Treaty, whatever it may be. And they don't have anything like that in Nepal. So anyone that wants to guide Everest can guide Everest. So it's it becomes pretty crazy up there. You see things on the mountain that you shouldn't see happening, like people not clipping into the fixed lines and getting into trouble, or people without the right gear up there. And it's really disheartening to see, but unfortunately, it's a part of Everest right now. But I think to rely on the Nepali government or the Nepal Ministry of Tourism to do the right thing and put the right controls in place is not necessarily going to happen, because it's just not that type of system they have over there. And I think the United States, we kind of take it for granted that our park service is so solid and so strong, and kind of keeps us safe, and holds us to these rules that keep us out of trouble in the mountains. And it's a great thing for sure.
Is it frustrating for you kind of seeing some of these fly-by-night operations pop up and maybe not take some potential clients, because they might not be going after the people you're going after, but they're at least there. Yep. And they at least take up space. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very frustrating. And, I get emails from families that have either had a family member, get hurt or killed on Everest and going with these companies. And it's so sad for me to see them operating the way they're operating and not taking any responsibility for their clients and their well-being. And, I hate to see it, and I wish there's more being done about it in the Everest community. But, we're just trying to do the best job we can, make sure our clients are safe and taken care of and have the guidance they need. And we hope that people will educate themselves and come climb with us, because they know we're going to do our best to keep them safe and get them that summit. And like I say, I think that's why we get so many great clients, because, the people that come to us are those that have done their homework and found, a guide service that is doing the right thing on Everest. We've got the infrastructure in place. We've got the most highly trained Sherpa. We've got, the best food and sanitation practices at base camp. And all those things lead to success on the mountain. And the people that have done their homework know that, and they come with companies like us. So we'll just try and keep doing the best job that we can.
I mean, that's honestly all you can do. I know public awareness of Everest has probably increased over the last few years, especially with some of the tragic occurrences, as well as some of the just sensational pictures that have come out. Do you think Everest as a mountain itself, as a mountaineering experience, is, I don't want to say overrated, but it's not the mountain everyone thinks it is? Like, there's more exciting, harder mountains out there?
Yeah, Mount Everest is a very unique experience. Basically, what you're signing up for when you go to Everest is to be part of a community challenging themselves against the tallest peak on Earth. And if you're looking for, this pristine wildlife experience, you're not going to find that on Everest. During peak season on Everest, there'll be 1,000 people on the mountain. And, so it's something that's become a lot more accessible to more people. If you're really fit and you kind of build up your climbing resume, you can climb Everest potentially if you do well at altitude. And, it's not like going off and climbing Everest alpine style solo, or climbing any other 8,000 meter peak alpine style on your own, because of that infrastructure there. So it's a very kind of unique experience. And it all depends on what experience you want to have. But that's kind of the Everest experience, and you need to know that that's what you're signing up for when you come to Mount Everest.
Man, and it's probably just going to continue. It's not like the status of it being the world's tallest mountain is ever going to change. You know what I mean? It's not like we were voted number one in something. It's, no, this is what it is. That's never going to change. And people are going to want to do it based on that forever. People aren't going to be flocking to Antarctica to climb that summit, Vincent Massive or whatever it's called, just because it's hard to get to. It's not the highest one. Who cares?
Absolutely. Yeah. There have been more than twice as many people that have climbed Everest than Vincent Massif, partly for that reason, but it's also the expense of getting down to Vincent. And if you want a bit more of a pristine mountain experience, then maybe look to peaks like Vincent Massif or get off on some of these other 8,000 meter peaks. I mean, there's virtually no one on Dhaulagiri or Nanga Parbat or Gasherbrum 1. So there are plenty of places you can go to challenge yourself. But I think there's this misconception too that because there's more infrastructure on Everest and the oxygen systems have gotten better, that it's no longer a challenge. And I can tell you, anyone that says that has not tried to climb Everest. Everest is the hardest thing that you'll ever do. And for the foreseeable future, it's going to be the hardest thing that you'll ever do. And to say that Everest is easy, that people can drag you up there, that it's no longer a challenge, is a total misconception. It's incredibly, incredibly hard, even with the infrastructure we have in place now and the oxygen systems we have and all the Sherpa support. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. And that certainly hasn't changed at all. It's one of the great accomplishments in the world, and anyone that sets that challenge for themselves has to be almost single-mindedly dedicated to it in order to achieve that goal.
Is there anything you can compare the difficulty level of Everest to just for normal everyday folk? Is it similar to running 100 miles or 500 miles or doing anything else that you could compare it to? Or is it just kind of all on its own?
That's a great question. I've run ultra marathons. I've done, Ironman triathlons. And while those things are very, very hard, they only last for a day or 5 hours or 10 hours or whatever it is. And for Everest, you need to be committed to it for 2 months. And literally you're suffering day after day. I'll tell you, going up the Lhotse face that first time, I'm hurting as bad as I'm hurting in a triathlon or an ultra marathon, but then I have to get up and do it all over again the next day. So Everest is incredibly tough, and I don't think you can really relate it to, other endurance challenges out there other than, say, other peaks like climbing Denali is very challenging in other ways. You're carrying a lot more weight. You've got worse weather. So, if someone has climbed Denali, then they kind of understand the commitment it takes to climb something like Everest, except that rather than it being 2 or 3 weeks, it's 2 months. So it's really tough to compare to any other challenges out there in the world.
Jeez. How do you get a client ready for something like that, man? Like, how do you say, here's what you're going to do. You're going to run 100 miles every day to get ready for this. Yeah, it's just nuts.
Yeah, there's a lot of preparation that goes into it for sure. And I think the biggest part is just kind of building up your climbing resume. The more time you spend in the mountains, the more you're going to be used to that type of suffering, the more you're going to have your systems dialed in as to what clothes you wear and what nutrition you need and what food you like up there. And so the more time you spend in the mountains, the more prepared you're going to be for a challenge like Everest.
Now with this, being a 2-month process, and I'm sure you're extremely involved with a lot of that for your clients. And you say that this is just a year-round thing. Is there an off season for you? Because you guys climb in both hemispheres and both both sides of the world. Do you have a time of the year where it's kind of a little bit of a break at least?
That's a great question. There really isn't. That's one of the beauties and the drawbacks of the 7 summits is, you're climbing on all 7 continents, and each continent has a different season when climbing is good there. So we're basically climbing on each continent at different times of the year. So there really isn't an off season. I always try and take a little bit of a break after the Everest season, because that's kind of our biggest trip. And, that's kind of, when you get through that season, it's when you can kind of take a deep breath and have a sigh of relief and, kind of let your guard down a little bit. But there really isn't an off season, 365 where we're going on different climbs.
You absolutely have to love it then.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be a passion to do it. There are really no off days, especially running your own company. Every day I'm on the emails. Every day I'm talking to guides who are out in the field, or I'm out in the field on these peaks myself. So there really aren't any off days. Even on the weekends, I'm still checking the emails and checking in with guides on the mountains. And there's no real downtime with this job.
And it just an amazing accumulation of knowledge and experience it takes to do this. I can only imagine. If someone wants to find out more, maybe sign up for a trip with you, how can they get a hold of you? Or if they're not ready for something like that, what's some advice you can share with somebody that's maybe just getting into it?
Yeah, I think start small and work big. One of the things I work with people on a lot is like a nice natural progression to get to where they want to go. Like, I get emails all the time. I don't have climbing experience, but I want to climb Everest. And, although it might sound absurd, it sends people down this road of like, okay, what do I need to do to prepare for Everest? And I work with people on a progression, like, okay, first let's do some snow schools, and then maybe we see how you do at altitude on Kilimanjaro, and then let's get on the snow on Everest, and then let's take it a little bit higher on Aconcagua. Let's see how you do with weight on Denali, and then all of a sudden you start building this experience, and maybe you're ready for Everest down the track. So, I just say start small, go through the proper channels, learn from the right people, take some climbing schools. We offer plenty of instruction through a lot of our courses. So you're happy. I'm happy to have people reach out to me directly, Mike at climbingthe7summits.com. They can check out our website and do a little research as to what peaks they might want to climb, just climbingthe7summits.com. And, I think just finding the right instruction to go about these things in the right way. Anyone can climb Everest. It's just having the dream and the dedication to get there. And, that's what I do for a living. I help people get there and climb safely and successfully. And, I encourage people to set big goals and chase them. And I'm here to help.
Mike, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. From what I've read and from what I know, you're highly, highly respected in the industry and in the community. And, if anyone out there is interested to get into this is your guy right here. This is the best of the best. And, great website, very informative. Like you said, it's not just cashing in a check and taking people. It's getting you to be the best mountaineer you can be, the best athlete you can be, and change your life. I can't imagine how life-changing these experiences are for people, and you get a front row seat to so much of it. It's got to be amazing.
Absolutely. I always say my job's easy. I just facilitate. I get people in the mountains and let the mountains do the rest. The mountains are an incredibly powerful medium. If people haven't experienced them, they should. Even if it's just going for a hike to the top of a 4,000 foot peak in New Hampshire, where I started. I was so inspired by that it led me to bigger and better peaks. But the mountains in nature are powerful, and I just encourage people to get out there and experience them for themselves.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure you've got a group to talk to or some logistics to figure out, so we won't keep you. Yeah. I hope you do get some time to rest. Everest season has been over for a little while, and best of luck to you, and just keep it going, man. This is awesome.
Awesome. Great to talk to you today, Mason, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, glad we could figure it out and pressed on. We could have easily rescheduled, but I'm really glad we did. Really glad we talked.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. Thanks for having me on.
All right. See ya.
Bye.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for listening to this episode. It really means the world to us that you want to spend your time with us. If you'd like to help us further, please just leave us a review on iTunes, share us on social media, tell your friends about us. You can become a patron, a supporter of the show for $5 a month at patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. And if you know somebody that would make a good guest, reach out. We're always looking for good adventure and outdoor stories. And lastly, thank you to our sponsors, whose messages follow right now. Athletic Brewing makes the best non-alcoholic craft beer. Go to their website at athleticbrewing.com and use the code in our show notes to save 15% on your first order. After all this adventure talk, if you're needing some gear yourself, but you need some advice before buying, go to backpacktribe.com, where you can ask questions to the owners who have experience with all the gear, as well as all of it for sale right there on their website.